Hello there, welcome to the 74th episode of Under the Radar. I am quite pleased to be back, and today's episode is going to relate to the last episode in which I had covered my band Dorm Life, our sophomore release, Roses Are Blue, which was produced by a gentleman by the name of Brian Peters. I went into a lot of the story of meeting Brian and how he related to being best friends with Phil Kalis, our bass player at the time. And so today's release is directly related to Brian Peters. And before I get into this album, I would like to just point out that you can go to my web store and purchase CDs, vinyl, shirts, posters, stickers, all kinds of different merchandise if you're into that. Like I said, Roses Are Blue is available there along with other albums that I've done. I appreciate your support being a full-time musician. I'm currently in New York State playing a bunch of gigs and gearing up to go back to the Ozarks so I can finish out a few gigs out there, hang out with the kids, and then come on back for another slew of gigs in September. So that all being said, let's get into today's release. It's none other than Brian Peters' solo. I'm going to say solo because he wrote it. However, it is not just Brian Peters. It would appear that it started out as Brian Peters and his solo effort, and it would turn into a collaboration between he and drummer extraordinaire Paul Wertico, who I mentioned in the previous episode. Paul Wertico was part of the Metheny Group, legendary group. Big fan of their record, Letter from Home. Yeah, it just overall encompasses a lot of different influences on this record. I probably am not the greatest to articulate the genres of this, but it is for sure. I remember getting this CD as we were wrapping up the recording and eventual release of our Roses Are Blue record, and Brian handed me a couple copies that were shrink wrapped. I was really excited to check it out, and it's just really intriguing music, and it definitely is in that jazz fusion category with avant-garde and electronica. Just it's got a lot of different influences, and I will say, well, let's just say this is all instrumental. There is no singing in it. There are some dialogues going on that are slowed down and put in different effects over songs. Kind of the production in some ways reminds me of the post-OK Computer era of Radiohead, specifically like the Kid A and the Amnesiac era of Radiohead. Some of that may be mixed together with John Bryan and some of his scoring work, maybe. I'm just trying to articulate this as somebody who's not a jazz musician. However, I am a fan of a lot of jazz music. And I think in the past, in this series, I've only covered one other instrumental record, and that was by a band called Dakota. And that was more math rock influenced, and maybe in that, like, I don't know, Owls, Cap and Jazz, American Football kind of styling, Colossal, those kinds of bands. And while there definitely is maybe some jazz in some of like their inversions and things, it certainly isn't. I wouldn't call it fusion, and I wouldn't call it avant-garde per se either. This is definitely a step above in genius. Brian Peters is someone that I could praise very easily. I respect him greatly, and working with him was an honor. I think back to the time that I was playing in bands and the kinds of bands that I was playing in versus what Brian and Phil and these other people in Barrington, Illinois were a part of. You know, Brian Peters, let's go ahead and tell the story here. Brian was playing in the Paul Wertico Trio, which was an ongoing effort and project by Paul Wertico with various musicians. And I talked a little bit about this in the last episode and showed a little footage online. I know that Brian played on one of the live DVDs. I don't know if Brian officially made it onto one of the records. I'd have to do my due diligence and look that up. But you can look at the Paul Wertico Trio on Discogs and find all of their releases. Just to be part of a group like that, should speak volumes to the talent of Brian Peters. An amazing composer, bass player, guitar player, multi-instrumentalist, keyboardist, just really exceptional artist. And so when he got together with Paul Wertico, they made quite a creative collaborative effort here. And I think that the recordings stem back to 2002, and eventually Paul would get involved and they would wrap it all up in 2006, which was when we were pretty much wrapping up a lot of, or in the thick of, our Roses Are Blue recordings. So going back to the Paul Wertico trio, I know that Brian Peters not only was doing that with Paul, but another artist which Brian Peters produced by the name of John Mulder. And I think John Mulder is to thank for a lot of the introductions and whatnot. John Mulder is also another jazz fusion artist that Brian produced his Bifrost record, another great record you should check out. And another guy I want to mention is Brian Fife, who Brian was working with as well. And Brian Fife later did a project with Brian and myself called the Horchata Network, and we made a couple of records collaboratively. However, that was Brian's brainchild and not mine, and I'm proud of what he came up with on that kind of stuff, and those will come up later. So let's go ahead and dive a little bit more into this record. Now, again, it was released in 2007. The label, I believe, only had one release called Rat Howl Ricords, and it was produced by Brian, and he was the main writer, performer, producer, everything except for drums and percussion, which was all on Paul Wertico. And one of my favorite songs, I'm trying to remember what it was, off of Letter from Home by Pat Metheny Group, their Geffen, one of their Geffen albums. I think it was like 557 or 7. I don't know. It was a series of numbers was the name of the title of the song. And forgive me for botching that, but that's my favorite song on the record. And the first song that I would like to play off of this album, I feel like it's the closest thing to that song on a percussive level. And this song is entitled Crayfish.
Now
just the drumming on that song, the hammer-ons, the cleans, and the electronics. It's just a really unique song. I think it's my personal favorite song on this album. Something else I wanted to note, I love that this album is called Ampersand. And instead of it being Brian Peters and Paul Wertico with like an ampersand, it's just Brian Peters, Paul Wertico, Ampersand. Just goes to show the humor of Brian Peters. Okay, let's dive into the next track on here. This song is acoustic based and it's gorgeous. This is my second favorite song on the record. This song is entitled And Hearts. Hearts with an ampersand. I love it. Anyway, this picks up in the middle of the song and there's a lot of just beautiful finger picking on here, and it goes from gorgeous to dissonance, and it's just I don't know, great song. I could hear that in like the background of a movie. It's beautiful. Moving on, this next song I think is more closely comparable to Radiohead, in my opinion. And this song has a little bit more straightforward drumming that eventually turn into avant-garde fills and all kinds of craziness. This song is called The Tundra. Great track. Now, I'm going to play a couple more for you, and I think one of the themes that I feel is going on sonically on this record is the whole chaotic, dissonant, then to clarity and beautiful, and then vice versa. And so I'd like to play a couple of examples of that, sort of in both of what I've just said here. So this fourth song that I'm going to play you is actually very chaotic at the beginning, and it turns into very calm at the ending. And this song is called Soul Partition. I very much enjoy the ending to that song. The drums are just very relaxing. The guitars, the bass tones, like everything about it is just very, again, I'll say the word calming. I find it very calming. And it's cool that they go from that chaotic to calm. But this final song that I'm going to play you does the opposite. It starts off a little bit more calm and goes into chaotic. This final track is entitled Dead Pixels. Excellent song. I really enjoy this record once again. I don't know how many instrumental records I'm going to be covering much on this series. This may be the only official like avant-garde in the jazz category kind of realm of fusion that I'll be playing. But I'm just really proud of Brian Peters. I'm proud of just his accomplishments as an artist. He's a genius. He's just pure genius. I also want to just read something out of the insert here, which cracks me up because Brian's just has this very off-kilter, kind of dry sense of humor, and extremely talented. And by the way, he was homeschooled. And I think, if I'm repeating the story correctly, I believe that Brian graduated high school, basically at age 15, and his mother, he asked his mother if he could attend the public school in Barrington, Illinois, where they lived. And he said that he kind of felt like a freak that he had graduated so early, and he wanted to just kind of socialize and get that experience of the public school there. And Barrington High School is actually a very highly rated school system. It's a very well-to-do suburb. And so he attended, and that's, I believe, where he met Phil, our bass player. What Brian told me about his experiences in that public school system in Barrington was that at the end of the day, with all of the wasted time, the setup, the tear down, the bell ringing, the to and fro, he was essentially used to learning a lot more in a concentrated time. And he felt that the public school, he was about learning maybe an hour a day of material if you collectively put all the subjects together. Which I think says a lot. Like, you have artists today like Billie Eilish, and I think finally we're getting some recognition in the homeschool realm of people and how beneficial homeschool is. I do think that there is a social aspect, and we should kind of get out a little bit and talk to people. But I think there's also an overemphasis on socialization, and we're a little too socialized, I think, in a way. So there's got to be a balance, but I think Brian's an example of just his mom did such a great job at schooling him, and he knows how to critically think, as opposed to a lot of us that went through just this straight up public school system. We weren't prepared to do a lot of the things that I think that he just does very seamlessly and naturally. Just, again, a brilliant mind. And one thing I just wanted to share about the recording experiences with Brian, and we recorded Roses Are Blue. I believe this was recorded at his parents' basement studio in Barrington, Illinois as well. Brian loved junk food, like specifically candy, we'll just say. And I have to read this from the insert to the record. It just cracks me up. Brian, also a big gearhead, was recording with Sonar at the time. He actually got me into the SM7B by Shure, the microphone, because I have a little bit more of an oomphy voice. So he helped me a little bit with my gear going forward with my home studio. But one of the companies that he endorsed, or maybe endorsed him a little bit also, was Universal Audio. And I just have to read this, it's just hilarious. It says lyrics on the inside. It says, "From Brian Peters to support at Universal Audio. Dear Universal Audio customer support, I am inquiring about possible products not listed in your online store, specifically confectionery items such as Tootsie Pops and those generic strawberry candies that are packaged with strawberry-looking wrappers, which could be purchased through redemption of my $50 store coupon. Sadly, my credit card is already at its limit for this month, and I have few other options. Please answer hastily as my coupon expires tomorrow. Thank you, Brian Peters." Then he printed right next to it the response from Universal Audio. This is great. And this was sent, so his was sent on September 29th, 2006. They didn't get back to him till October 5th, 2006. However, that's still a pretty close window there. Alyssa from Universal Audio said, "Dear Brian, we have gathered an assortment of candy for you, including your requested Tootsie Pop and generic strawberry candies. We have shipped your order out today, October 5th, so it should be arriving soon. Your voucher is now invalid and was used toward this purchase. P.S. We were just kidding about using your voucher toward this. P.P.S. We really did send you the candy. Thank you, Alyssa. Love that. It just shows, again, Brian's humor. I have such great memories of making Roses Are Blue with Brian and doing some pre-production on Mustard is the New Ketchup, and also just working with him on Horchata Network material, hanging out with him. Just a brilliant, kind human being. I miss you, Brian. I hope you're doing good. This record deserves a spin. I would assume that there were only 1,000 of these pressed, and it is on actual CD, Glassmaster. It's worth the buy, especially if you're a Paul Wertico fan, or like I said, if you're a fan of maybe any John Bryan stuff, which I'm a big fan of. This, I'm not going to say it all reminds me of that, but there are compositions that remind me of John Bryan's scoring, and I would recommend this record to any fan, of course, of John Mulder, and maybe any Pat Metheny Group fans out there for the Paul Wertico fans. Again, Paul Wertico, legend on the drums. There is just so much to cover on Paul Wertico and what he's done with his discography and the legacy that he leaves behind as an artist. So the fact that Brian did this record, Ampersand, with Paul Wertico is maybe the coolest thing that I've covered in this entire series of Under the Radar. And I know I've been covering a lot of like the underground punk scene and different genres and subgenres related to that, but how about the jazz scene in Chicago? How about the history of jazz and fusion? And that's a whole nother level of musicianship. And I'm just proud that that I have a friend named Brian Peters who makes such brilliant music. So I guess that's about all I have to say about this release at this time, but feel free to go on Discogs, get yourself a copy of Ampersand by Brian Peters, Paul Wertico, released in 2007 by Rat Howl Records. Also, go in the Dorm Life store, not the Dorm Life store, the samswansonmusic.com/store, and get yourself a copy of Roses Are Blue, which was produced by none other than Brian Peters. And I think you'll really enjoy that. Check out some of my other stuff. I am working on a bunch of other things with Slave to Servant right now. I'm hoping to film a couple of music videos for some songs on the Red Tape in the coming months. Hopefully we'll have that ready to go in 2025 as far as the release. And yeah, just chilling, trying to survive, y'all. So go to samswansonmusic.com/store if you want to support me and get some physical items. Go to samswansonmusic.com/music if you would like to just purchase a digital copy or even get it free of any of my previous releases. Also check out Horchata Network, another great band that Brian Peters is his brainchild with Brian Fife and then myself involved with as well. I sang a number of the songs and kind of did a little bit of composition, but not a ton. I had nothing to do with the lyrical content, but nonetheless, check that out on Bandcamp. Great project that I'll be covering in the future. And yeah, I'll be back soon to cover another release by an artist named Vaporize. So I look forward to covering that and being back. And I just want to say thank you for your comments and thank you for your subscriptions on my YouTube channel. It means a lot to me that people care about these little trivial things that I cover in long form content in today's filtered society. So I appreciate that, and thank you for your time.